Hello, my name is Jason Storch, and I'm here today to talk to you about why you should migrate to SharePoint 2013. Just a little bit about who I am. I'm a solution architect responsible for AIS's commercial SharePoint practice. I have 7 years custom application development with SharePoint and 15 years total software development and operations experience. To give you a quick overview of some of the topics I'll be covering today, in particular, I'll be talking about the new SharePoint 2013 search and some of its key new features, the new mobile UI and app support, some changes in the licensing model that will help you realize some cost savings and increase your return on investment in the platform. I'll also be discussing the various new SharePoint app models, and finally I'll touch on the performance enhancements that Microsoft implemented in the most recent release. So now with SharePoint 2013, Microsoft has added a new feature called Search and Usage Analytics, which makes SharePoint search more intelligent over time and helps us bridge the gap between intranet search and internet search. In the end, the more search is used, the more intelligent and relevant it's going to get, and SharePoint will begin to mimic the internet search engines that your users search on every day. These are just some of the highlights of the data that's now available to SharePoint Search. The first is what's referred to as the anchor text. So basically that's the text of the link that shows up between the two anchor tags. So if you have a page that has the word benefits in the link, then when someone searches for benefits, SharePoint's going to consider that more relevant than another page. SharePoint's also looking at the click distance from what are now called authoritative pages. So instead of looking at the link URL like SharePoint 2010 did, it's now actually looking at the distance between pages that you configure in central administration as an authoritative page. So this could be your root portal for your intranet. It could be the document center where you maintain all your documents, or it could be a record center. So whatever you consider to be a more authoritative page, and SharePoint takes that rank that you give that authoritative page and passes it on to the pages that are linked to from those authoritative pages. So SharePoint's also looking at search clicks now. So the more people click on a search result, the more relevant SharePoint's going to consider it to be over time. So if everyone searches for benefits and ends up clicking on the third search result, then eventually SharePoint's going to promote that up to be the most relevant result. Also, SharePoint's looking at usage counts and usage rates, so the rate of growth of usage of a page. So over time, the more a page is used, the more relevant it's going to be. Or if a new page gets promoted or gets created, and people are visiting it a lot in recent time, then that's going to be considered more relevant than an old page with a lot of hits. So SharePoint's also looking at social tags. So the more people tag a piece of content, either a document or a page, the more relevant SharePoint's going to consider it. And it's also looking at the text of those tags. So if a lot of people are tagging a page of benefits, then it's going to be considered more relevant when someone searches for benefits. So the next new feature of SharePoint 2013 search that I'd like to talk about is the new enhanced user interface for search. Microsoft put a lot of work into this. Everything is client-side driven. A lot of JavaScript code went into this. One of the first things you'll see is that there's additional result sources up at the top. These used to be referred to as search scopes, but now everybody's referring to them as result sources. I'll go into some details about those in a little bit, but you have everything, people, conversations, and videos. So there's additional ones, and you can add additional result sources as needed and map them to what are now referred to as result types. So result types are basically the equivalent to what you used to see as content types, except I can define these custom. I can roll different content types up into a single result type to make them more intelligible to your end users. All the refiners now are also client driven, so I'm not having to, if I click on a refiner, I'm not having to do a post back to the server and refresh the page. It's all just driven on the client side and rendering things from the client rather than having to do a full page refresh. We also have these new refiners that are called visual refiners. So you'll see like modified date, for instance. I can drag this and it'll actually render the results in real time. I have a hover panel and I have a display template. So each result type has an associated display template and hover panel that goes with it. And one of the things Microsoft really focused on with the new search user interface was to make the content and the search results actionable. So to prevent the user from having to click through to each search result to see if it's actually what they're looking for. I can see previews here. I can see the different sections of if it's a PowerPoint presentation. From within the hover panel, I can edit, I can follow the document and get notified about changes. I can send it to someone else, or I can go to the library that it's contained with. And before, with SharePoint 2010, it was like 5 or 6 clicks to do each one of these actions, and now it's just 1 click from the search results page. So if I click over to people, you'll see the result type actually changes, and now I'm seeing people search results, and the display template is completely different. So I'm seeing more properties about the user, and it's not just displayed the same way I would have seen, the other search results like documents. And these display templates are very easy to customize. So it's very easy for me to add additional properties in here. So if maybe I wanted to see skills for my employees in the hover panel, I could have that be a property that we showed there. In addition, we now have the conversations result source. So this is actually showing me community sites, which are a new feature of SharePoint 2013 that I won't go into at this time. But I'm seeing different data here now. So the number of members, number of discussions, how active the conversation is, instead of just the typical search results. In addition to query rules, result types are another way that SharePoint lets me customize how search results are displayed to my users. Result types are a way to basically categorize a search result based on either its content type or the metadata that is on the document. For instance, you might have a result type for a sales presentation that's any PowerPoint presentation with the tag of sales. So that's just one example, but there's a lot more complex things that you can do with these. And it's kind of interesting because we in 2010 we would spend a lot of time defining enterprise taxonomies and content types for our clients, but when it came to displaying those different content types in search results, they ended up all looking the same. So what result types give us the chance to do is change that and extend that enterprise taxonomy to search. So just to zoom in here and show you these screenshots, this is an example of one that I had set up in central administration in my site settings, and basically I've defined it as a Northeast region marketing report, and I've said, match this when a search is run on the document's result source, and it should match the PDF content type, because I know all my marketing reports end up getting saved as PDFs and distributed that way. And then I can define the properties that result type should match against, and that's where the account name equals Northeast. Now this could be any property that I defined in my enterprise taxonomy. And then I can also determine how that result type is supposed to look in the search results. And in this case, I'm just using one of the out-of-the-box display templates, which I'll go into in a minute. Or I could define my own custom one, and I'll go into it here shortly, how you go about creating new display templates. So display templates, as I said before, are a way to define how a search result and its corresponding hover panel is displayed. I can associate them with one or more result types, and they exist in the master page gallery. And if I want to have a custom display template for a result type, It's really as simple as copying an existing template that I want to mimic and adding the additional properties or display logic that I want to use. Now on the development side, display templates are probably one of the biggest development improvements in SharePoint 2013. So how many of you out there have actually developed with XSLT? And of those people who have actually developed in XSLT, how many actually like developing with XSLT? I mean, probably none of you, right? So display templates are built entirely on JavaScript. So there's no more XSLT in the search results web part. And at the SharePoint conference last year, when Scott Hillier announced the death of XSLT at a session, he got a standing ovation because it was such a popular enhancement from the development perspective. And let's be realistic, most people don't know XSLT, and it's just an antiquated way to do development. I mean, I did development with XSLT back in the 90s, so it's just really not a modern technology to be developing in. And display templates are easily customized, as I said before, and they really give us the flexibility to define new ways to display our search results, and make the search results more intelligible to our end users. So for my next topic, I'm going to talk about the enhancements in the mobile support for SharePoint 2013. So these are just a few statistics about mobile devices and smartphones. And you don't need me to tell you that mobile devices are changing the way that we do business. However, how many of you out there have a smartphone or tablet? Actually, how many of you have multiple smartphones or tablets? Probably most of you. But how many of you actually use them to access SharePoint? It's going to be a very small percentage of you. And the reason for that is because SharePoint just doesn't support most of the use cases you need it to for mobile device access. So one of the ways Microsoft is making SharePoint more usable for mobile devices is by releasing native apps. They've done this now with Windows Phone 8 and iOS. Microsoft just released the SharePoint Newsfeed app in the last few weeks, or in the last few months. And this lets you update your newsfeed and interact with colleagues through your Windows Phone or your iOS device. But actually what I find more useful is the Office Hub on my Windows Phone, and I can use that to access my files on my SkyDrive or my SharePoint sites. And in a pinch, I can collaborate on a document with someone. If for some reason a last minute edit's needed, or I need to review it and approve something, I can get to it right from my Windows Phone. Now with SharePoint 2013, Microsoft has definitely extended the support for iOS and Android devices in its standard UI, and it's actually referred to as the PC view now. And we also have three options for the mobile views, and on this slide what you're seeing are those three different examples. You have the classic view, which is basically what SharePoint 2010's mobile view was like. You have the contemporary view, and that's based on HTML5 and basically supports any browser that supports HTML5, mobile browsers that support HTML5, or iPads or tablets as well. And then I have the full screen UI, which supports pinch and scroll just on a mobile device. So I can switch back and forth between the full screen UI and the contemporary view based on what I'm trying to do. But in the end, it's really not reasonable or usable for you to try to surface everything you can do in SharePoint on a smartphone. If any of you have tried to use a mobile UI in SharePoint 2010 on your smartphone, you realize that there's just too many options for what you can do. But it is reasonable to have an interface that allows your employees to complete tasks in a critical business workflow, right? So pretty much like within SharePoint 2010, if we want to enable mobile users, we need to define those scenarios that we want to empower them to complete on their mobile devices and create usable interfaces for them. And one of the new tools that we have to do this is called device-specific channels. Device-specific channels let us define different master pages and content for the devices that we choose. And these allow us to change the menu system or the layout of a page, or even add additional content areas and make them specific for mobile devices. And we can set up additional profiles for mobile devices, and you literally have multiple channels, a channel for an Android, a channel for an iPad, so you really have a lot of flexibility into how you define what those channels and what the content is that's available to those different devices. Additionally, there are APIs that allow us to send SMS or push messages to a user's phone. So if you have a critical business process and you really can't wait for a user in a workflow to respond to an email, you can wait a certain amount of time and then in that workflow send a push notification or send an SMS alert to their mobile device and let them know that there's something urgent they need to pay attention to. And push notifications and SMS alerts can be configured at a farm level, assuming that you have a service that you are subscribed to that lets you send those SMS alerts or push notifications, because the alert engine is actually not built into SharePoint. Next, I want to take you through a demo application, a proof of concept that we did for one of our clients. It was back in early 2012. Prior to SharePoint being released to RTM, we did it as part of the technology acceptance program. And we partnered with our client to take an existing 2010 application and create a mobile interface using SharePoint 2013. The purpose of the existing 2010 application was to allow people to see details about attorneys. So there was a very large law firm based out of DC, and it allowed them to see attorneys' assignments and availability, what matters they were working on, what their billable hours were, and basically gave them a complete view of an attorney. And what prompted them to want to do this project was basically to enable their executives to access the application. And it seemed that a lot of their executives used iPads or tablets in meetings and would be discussing resourcing and wanted to check the application, but it didn't work on their iPads or iPhones because it was built on SharePoint 2010. So basically the goals for the project were, one, to use as little custom code as possible. They wanted to support iPhones and iPads because that's what a majority of their executives had. And they wanted to be a one-stop dashboard for an attorney, so allow someone to come in, quickly search for an attorney, and see what their availability was. And just some technical features about this application before I get into the demo. It was 100% content driven, so in the end there was no solution deployments for it. It was all jQuery code calling existing web services on the back end that existed for the current application. We did actually use Twitter Bootstrap as the layout engine, and that allows us to create a responsive design that adjusted for landscape versus portrait layouts, and also would adjust the navigation based on what the real estate was on the screen. And we ended up using device-specific channels, which allowed us to target different content to smartphones versus the full desktop version. So now I'll just switch over to my demo. So what I'm going to show you here isn't truly the real application. This is kind of a scaled down version of it, but it'll definitely give you the sense of how the application worked. So here I'm just looking at the regular home page for the site, and you can see there's just some content on the home page. I can click through to see a list of clients. In the client's example, this would have been a list of attorneys. And then I can see the list of clients or attorneys and click through and actually see the details about it. So it's a pretty scaled down version, and we're just using sample data here and not real data from the client. And I can see a lot of details about them, forecasted hours, summary of their existing report out, top 5 matters that they were working on, and top 5 matters year to date. So a week view and a year view. So then I would switch over to an iPad and I would see the same thing, except I would basically see a more mobile-friendly view of the list of attorneys. And I actually have the ability to filter down that list based on anything I type at the top. And I can click through to that specific attorney and see basically a scaled down version of that same page I was just looking at. I can switch over to hours worked. And in the real application, I'm doing this on an iPad emulator right now, but in the real application, this is actually swipe enabled, so I could swipe between the different tabs. So that's the equivalent in the iPad, and then I can switch over to my iPhone and actually see an even more scaled down version of that content in the same, pretty much the same charts, except at the top I can actually see that the navigation is completely altered based on the fact that I have less screen real estate. Anyway, so I just want to show you how quickly you can switch from one device channel to another based on a device. So I'll take us into, this is actually where I would manage device-specific channels for this application. And it's just in the site settings for the current site. So I could just check, excuse me, my mobile device channel. And come up here and say I want to edit that. And here I see that I've included these device inclusion rules. So if I wanted to change iPad and say I want that to see the desktop view now, then all I have to do is come in here. Excuse me, my computer is slowing down a bit. Click Save. And once this saves, I'll be able to go back to my iPad, refresh the page, and it will show me the same view as I saw on my desktop. So it's really just as easy as that. So with that, I'll move on to my third topic and quickly cover some changes in the SharePoint licensing model that can help you realize a larger return on investment in your existing SharePoint platform. So I already kind of touched on this before, but with SharePoint 2013, SharePoint Search and Fast are now combined into a single product. In SharePoint 2010, it would have cost you around $75K, that's $25,000 per server, for a minimum 3 physical server deployment in order to have Fast. And Fast, in addition to that, also required that you had SharePoint Enterprise deployed and Enterprise user counts for all your users that were going to access Fast. And now with SharePoint 2013, you only have to pay for the SharePoint server licenses for that search farm. And depending on your license agreement, that's potentially a $60,000 cost savings. So in addition, with SharePoint 2010, if you wanted to do extranet or internet scenarios, it came with a pretty hefty price tag. For internet sites, you had to purchase a SharePoint for Internet Sites license for each of your front-end web servers. So if you were following best practices, you had 2 web front ends minimally, and you're looking at a cost of either 12 to 50K per server, depending on whether or not you were using SharePoint Enterprise for your internet site or your extranet site. And you could make a decision either if you wanted to use in an extranet scenario, if you wanted to pay for the individual user cals or just get the Fizz license, but it was usually a pretty hefty cost in order to open it up to external users. But now with SharePoint 2013, external users don't require additional cals. You can open up to as many external users as you want. The Fizz license is now deprecated. So that's definitely, if you have an existing SharePoint infrastructure, you could potentially open that up to external users in either extranet or internet scenarios for a minimal cost. So next I'll move on to the SharePoint app model and some of the work that Microsoft has put into SharePoint to expose some governance and stability into customizations that we deploy. So before I get into what an app actually is in SharePoint 2013, I just wanted to give you a brief history / evolution of custom app development in SharePoint to give you a little context. So with SharePoint 2007, customizations, you had one option for deploying customization. You could deploy them to the farm. If you deployed a customization to the farm, it was running in the same space as everything else. It was running in the same application pool as everything else. And if there was a problem with it, you were really impacting everything else in the farm. And with SharePoint 2010, customizations could be deployed to the farm as well. It also provided you a new feature called Sandbox, which was a good way to isolate your applications, but in the end, it was very limited, and most people didn't use it because it was so limited. Microsoft also introduced the concept of the client-side object model, and this opened up some limited subset of functionality to be executed through JavaScript. The list service was one of the things that was available to you, so you could query lists and add items to lists, which was great, but it was still pretty limited in the level of functionality that you could write client code with. So with SharePoint 2013, we now have the ability to deploy apps. We can still deploy customizations to the farm like we did before, and we still have the sandbox, but there's really no reason to use it anymore. But apps give us a lot more flexibility than the sandbox did, without, in the end, impacting the rest of the farm. We also have the ability to host customizations outside of SharePoint in either Azure or other web or application servers, and these customizations can be written in any language you like, Linux, Java, PHP, Ruby on Rails, and they can all interact with SharePoint through RESTful services that are exposed through either CSOM or REST. So what is an app? It's simply a discrete piece of functionality that can be rolled out for end users to consume. Apps can be purchased or deployed through the SharePoint store. Also, you can deploy your own SharePoint apps locally to your own farm if you don't want to send them out through the SharePoint store. Also, administrators can set policies about what apps are approved for installation by site owners across different SharePoint sites. And if you're a site owner and you go to deploy an app, you're really just going into the same place that you would create a custom list or a document library or a contacts list or a calendar. So it's basically the same kind of concept, and that it's a discrete piece of functionality that you can consume. So this table basically highlights the different types of apps that you can have. So it's a concept of an immersive app, which when the user interacts with them, they're actually navigating into a full website and interacting with pages directly. They actually leave your SharePoint site and go into the app site. Second, you have the concept of an app part, which are basically widgets, and it's the equivalent of deploying a custom web part and using it in a web page within your site. And finally, you have this concept of an extension, which basically allows you to extend menus, either the ribbon or the context menu within SharePoint. So as far as where you can actually put an app, there's three different options. You have this concept of a provider-hosted app. So what provider-hosted apps allow you to do is bring in your own infrastructure, host the app on your own hardware, and integrate functionality into SharePoint through the app model. This not only works for an on-prem deployment of an app, but also works with cloud deployments of apps. And this is probably the most robust and scalable app option. The next option is what's referred to as an auto-hosted or Azure auto-hosted app. And in this scenario, basically, SharePoint figures out where to host the app. And it's only available to you through if you have an Office 365 SharePoint instance. If you deploy that app to your Office 365 instance, SharePoint just figures out where to host it, actually creates the Azure instance for the app, and takes care of all the isolation of one app deployment versus another within your farm. And the final option you have to deploy your app is with the SharePoint hosted app. This is best for smaller on-prem app deployments. It's not as scalable as the provider-hosted option, but it allows you to simply deploy an app and enable it throughout all the sites within your organization's SharePoint farm. And this chart is basically showing the larger breadth of skill sets that can be used for SharePoint development in SharePoint 2013. In SharePoint 2007, it was a very limited set of development skills that you could use. SharePoint 2010 extended that a little bit, but now in SharePoint 2013, we have a very large skill set that we can tap into. And these aren't just SharePoint specific skill sets like we had with SharePoint 2010 and 2007. These are skill sets that are widely used across application development, web application development, and not just necessarily Microsoft technologies, but also PHP, Linux, and other application development platforms outside of .NET. So this last table simply shows the large increase that we have in client-side scripting and the functionality available to us to deliver custom applications, especially through app development, because with SharePoint hosted apps, we don't have any server-side code available to us. But all this new functionality that's available to us through REST and the client SharePoint object model makes it much easier to develop apps in SharePoint 2013. And these last slides basically just go over what I've already discussed as far as SharePoint hosted apps, auto hosted apps, and provider hosted apps. So for my last topic, I'll cover some of the performance improvements that Microsoft made in the SharePoint 2013 platform. The first performance improvement that Microsoft made is a feature called minimal download strategy. And what minimal download strategy does is it reduces the page rendering time and decreases the latency between the server and the end user. When it's turned on, and it's turned on by default on any non-publishing site, SharePoint is going to inspect the response prior to processing it on the server side. And it's going to look for content areas like the header and the left nav that aren't changing from page request to page request. And it's only going to process the areas of the page on the server that are actually changing. And this, in the end, improves the overall performance and the response time. And overall, the site is going to seem a lot more responsive to the end user. There's a page that all requests are routed through called start.aspx. And you'll see in the URL, when this is turned on, that even though I'm going to home.aspx, it's actually going through start.aspx. In addition, Microsoft made a number of scalability enhancements to SharePoint 2013, including increasing the maximum number of site collections that you can have. Now you might say, who's ever going to hit under 250,000 site collections? Well, we have definitely reached those types of limits with SharePoint in some of our deployments with our clients. You can have double the number of sites per content databases, and you now have a maximum of 500 content databases per farm. The final performance improvement is a new feature called shredded storage. This is a feature that's implemented behind the scenes in SharePoint between the SharePoint server and the SQL server. It also works with existing blob storage deployments like MetaLogic Storage Point. To put it simply, shredded storage saves space between multiple versions of a file by cutting up one big blob into smaller blobs. Before shredded storage, a user updating a 5 megabyte file and only changing one paragraph actually was creating a whole other copy of that 5 megabyte file in the content database. But with shredded storage, if only one paragraph of the file changes, only that one smaller blob is updated in the database. And this, in the end, not only reduces the I/O needs between SQL Server and SharePoint, but also your long-term storage requirements.